remember being, funnily enough, in the theatre watching the Lego Movie and having the first sort of inkling that I was not having first thinking that I have Tourette's, but the first sort of spot chain of events that led me to the diagnosis, because it was sort of like a whoo noise, like a whoo, and I just couldn't stop doing it.
When we say that this doesn't affect education necessarily, it's not a condition that affects learning, but there are barriers to learning all day. Whether a child is ticking or suppressing, they won't be concentrating on their work. What we say to teachers is you can't stop the ticks, you really can't focus on them and stop them, but what we try and do is go back a step and look at the anxieties and the things and the triggers again that are fueling those urges, really.
Hello and welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, the podcast that brings you the latest in the world of tutoring, edtech and education, and hopefully inspires in you the big change that each and every one of us is capable of. Qualified Tutor is an industry-leading tutor training organisation and online tutoring community for thousands of tutors around the world. This podcast is the voice of this community, where we aim to hear from tutors, teachers, entrepreneurs, coaches, business experts, students, tutorpreneurs, and more from the world of tutoring about what inspires them every day, how they can help tutors like you, and what they've learnt about tutoring along the way. The question is, what will you learn today?
As you'll soon hear from our wonderful Jack Simmonds, this episode, the 143rd episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast, is going to be a little different. My name is Ludo Miller, the regular host of this podcast, but today's episode will be hosted and led by Jack Simmonds, a wonderful member of the Qualified Tutor team, who will be speaking to Lucy and Tom from the Toghill family about Tourette's and the importance it has for all of us. And that's going to be a really great next 35 to 40 minutes. I hope you enjoy.
Welcome. Today we have a very special episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast with an unusual host, me, Jack, and our two lovely guests, Lucy and Tom, who are going to be talking to us about Tourette's syndrome in great detail. So I'm going to hand over to them to introduce themselves today. So, guys.
Do you want to go first?
No, you go first.
Oh, okay. My name's Lucy. I'm Tom's mum. I am a teacher, SEN teacher by trade. And I've been working for Tourettes Action now for the last sort of 5 or 6 years. My title there is education manager. So schools will contact me when they've got a child with Tourette's and they want to know strategies on how best to support them in school. And parents will ring me when they're in despair and their kids aren't being supported in school and want to know ways of accessing that support, really. And yeah, that's me really. Tom's 16. You can introduce yourself.
Yeah,
Tom,
sure.
Do you want to talk about when you were diagnosed?
My name is Thomas and I am 16 years old. I was diagnosed with Tourette's when I was about 6, maybe 7, whenever the Lego Movie came out. And I remember being, funnily enough, in the theatre watching the Lego Movie and having the first sort of inkling that I was not having first thinking that I have Tourette's, but the first sort of spot chain of events that led me to the diagnosis, because it was sort of like a whoo noise, like a whoo, and I just couldn't stop doing it. And obviously, Mum, not knowing any better, was like, and I'm like, I can't.
Don't embarrass me now.
I'm embarrassing you. I'm sorry.
Weren't Tourette's aware in those days?
Suck.
But like any parent, though, don't you think?
Absolutely.
You give birth to this beautiful bundle of joy, don't you? And you have no other aspirations that they're going to be perfect. And of course they are. They're all perfect. But you're suddenly thrown into this world of SEN with lots of new words to use and language and lots of acronyms, and it can be quite a scary place, really. But we learnt very quickly, didn't we?
Yeah, we seem to have adapted quite quickly to the situation.
Yeah.
Great. So can we start off then with what actually is Tourette syndrome for the uninitiated?
Do you want me to take that one?
Seems like you're...
So Tourette syndrome is a neurological condition. It's an inherited condition. That doesn't mean mum and dad will have Tourette's, but it will mean that somewhere along the family tree, somewhere in that diagnostic process, that the clinician will identify possibly people with Tourette's quite far back, or that mum or dad or someone in the close family that have got one of the co-occurring conditions that come along with Tourette's. It's not a learning disability. In fact, many of our kids are really high functioning with autistic traits because that's a common co-occurring condition. And it's not a mental health condition either. I'm very good at telling you what it isn't, actually, dispelling all those myths out there. Of course, it can affect mental health for many reasons, but this is a neurological condition, much like epilepsy. 1 in 100 children have Tourette's, which is quite a scary statistic because it's the same statistic as autism, yet we know so much more about autism. I think that's it. That's Tourette's, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
What does like the symptoms of Tourette's? What does it mean
to me, it's sort of... I'm not sure, really. The tics themselves can literally range from anything from like shouting rude stuff to just doing that, or just really anything. I remember one of my friends had who also had Tourette's. One of their tics they had once was saying the dictionary definition of Tourette syndrome. So it literally, your tics can be absolutely anything.
And they're really sort of categorised into two, aren't they? That's vocal tics and motor tics.
Yeah.
So motor tics are any movement tics, and tics are sudden repetitive movements. They're completely involuntary. That's really important to say. And or they can be vocal as well. And when we mean vocal, it doesn't have to be words. So it can be noises, it can be sniffs, clearing of the throat, grunting, things like that. So yeah, lots of. We could write pages and pages of what tics are. They're so people. You meet one person with Tourette's, you've met one person.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I'm hearing is a really important message here for our tutors is that tics are involuntary, right? So the student that they might be working with who maybe exhibits some symptoms of Tourette syndrome, they're not doing it on purpose. And can we go back a little bit? Tom, you said something that it was one of their tics for a while. So does that mean that your kind of what you experience in your tics changes?
Yeah.
And
yes.
Do you know why?
Well, I think it's like different tics can like change. Tics, you can lose tics and you can gain tics. A common sort of thing that happens is when different people with Tourette's gather together, they sometimes take up other people's tics and start having other people's tics, and they like kind of swap. And it's really weird, but yeah.
I mean, what we say is tics are very suggestible. So if we're going to talk about, if I listed all Tom's tics now, his current tics, he will do them all for you. He will. The brain part, the tic part of the brain is a very attention-seeking part, and we have to make that very clear. The child is not. It's just the very person's of the condition. So if we talk about tics, and for example, if I suggest that school do risk assessments in dangerous lessons where someone might throw a knife, or we're not going to do that risk assessment just before the lesson, because everything we fear might happen, and we're going to discuss with the child will probably happen, because we're feeding. It's a bit like when, I wouldn't sit a child next to a fire alarm that says do not touch, because unfortunately you fed that. So we're really good with positive language in schools now, aren't we? Especially SEN schools, and so we would say things like walking nicely instead of stop. So I would advise all that type of language around it. I'm not quite sure we answered the question. I think we originally talked about I think that the criteria for having Tourette's is that it is changeable, because many children can have tics. Many young children can have tics. They can grow out of tics. But if they've had them for more than a year and it's still a concern, and they're changeable, what we say, they wax and wane. You know,
Right.
so we don't just have one tick all the time. We can have different ticks every day. Old ticks will come back. New ticks can surprise us, can't they? So that's what I think makes it hard in schools, is because we haven't just got, this is what happens to Tom.
Yeah.
You know, every day can be different.
Right.
And that's okay to question that. You know, I have many teachers, and you have grown up actually. People think you've been making, you know, chosen behaviour.
Oh, absolutely.
Options. When actually it's just a tick, and we know ticks can, for example, be in context. If you're taught, you know, if I told Tom to hurry up and finish his work, he might tell me to shut up, or even worse. And, you know, it's about children knowing about their Tourette's. It's about getting the right psychoeducation and support so that they can explain themselves and say, oh, that was a tick, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many places we could go now, which is so exciting.
I get a bit of verbal diarrhea.
No.
Excited talking about Tourette's.
It's great. It's fascinating. I'm trying to sponge it all up myself. So we've got these ticks, and they are contextual potentially, and that's what we see as people who don't have Tourette's, right? From the outside. When you're sitting in a kind of a classroom environment, Tom, and can you feel that a tick is on its way? Do you know when it's coming, or do they just happen without warning?
Honestly, it really depends. I feel sometimes if it's like a big one, like going across the room and touching my foot on something, I can feel it happening for a while. But if it's like a small one, like a head tilt or something like that.
Talk about them now.
Speaking of which, it literally, there's no warning and it just happens.
Okay.
There is a level of suppressibility. You know, young children won't be aware of it. You know, we suppress. It's a bit like autism and masking, isn't it? You probably suppress tics when you're not trying to, sometimes subconsciously, because you are aware there are situations like assembly where it's expected that you are quiet. So children do try, but it's very hard, and we shouldn't expect children to, because suppressing is really tiring, isn't it? And we always say it's a bit like doing a staring competition, not blinking for a whole minute. You know, if I asked you to do that, you'd fail miserably. But, you know, when I ask teachers to do that, it's a bit like saying, that's what it feels like to suppress a tick all day, because not only will you be your eyes will be sore, you'd be tired, it's exhausting suppressing, but you know, all you'll be thinking about all day is not blinking. So you won't be, you know, when we say that this doesn't affect education necessarily, you know, it's not a condition that affects learning, but there are barriers to learning all day. You know, so whether a child is ticking or suppressing, they won't be concentrating on their work. So there's going to be a lot of, you know, we need to make teachers aware that if a child is looking quite engaged in their work, you know, it might be that they're really concentrating on ticking, but they're not going to be listening to anything around them. So it's hard, isn't it? It's hard. Every day is quite tricky.
Okay, that's a really interesting piece there, that it's not a learning disorder or learning difficulty, but that actually the symptoms that you experience will affect how you access education.
With thanks to episode sponsors, the Tutor Index.
Hi there, I'm Chris, co-founder of the Tutor Index. It's incredibly exciting to be sponsoring this episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Whether you're just starting out or have been tutoring for a number of years, the Tutor Index provides a great platform to promote yourself to new and existing clients and allows you to teach how you want, when you want. Best of all, we charge zero commission or finder's fees, meaning you keep more of what you earn. So sign up today for your free profile at thetutorindex.com.
So we understand now that tics are voluntary. We understand that they change over time. We understand that you might have an inkling that they're happening, but a lot of the time they just take you by surprise, and that there is a level of suppressibility, right? But that's not something that we want to encourage, because it's exhausting. And also because it's just not very person affirming, is it, to say there's a part of you that I don't want to see, right? We don't want that.
Accepting you for who you are, isn't it? And unfortunately, there is a rebound effect with tics. It's a bit like if I said to you, don't sneeze, you could probably suppress that, but you know, 10 minutes later, that sneeze is going to come out, you know. Right. So we want children really, and it's about it's not expecting them to suppress, because many children can't. And you can learn suppression through cognitive behavioural therapy, but that is a treatment choice that parents will go down with their children if your child is in danger or the child themselves wants to learn that. But it shouldn't be enforced. So yeah, suppressibility is hard.
Great. Great that we should be enforcing, not that suppressibility is hard. So are there any other strategies that tutors, because when you're the nice thing about working with a tutor is we get to know our students quite personally, and a lot of what we do with our students is tailored uniquely to them. Yeah, right. It fits their needs because we can do that. We don't have a class full of children. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 students, young people who we're with. So what I'm imagining is we're just allowing them to happen. We're acknowledging them maybe if they're amusing, but we're not paying any particular special attention to them. They're just part of the learning environment. How else can we support students with Tourette's in our lessons?
What do you think, Tom? What's useful?
I think I'm not really sure. I think just be mindful is all I can really say. Just sort of be mindful of them, and obviously it's hard for teachers and stuff to know when someone isn't listening or when someone's mind is focused on other things. But overall, just be mindful of them, because usually they tend to drift away from other things.
I mean, if I can add there, one thing we advocate for teachers is, first of all, to ignore the tics where possible. That doesn't mean ignore the child. It means once the plan's in place and we've talked about Tourette's and we're all aware, we've all been educated, we're going to ignore the tics because, as I said, they are quite suggestible, and we can feed them. Even, like if Tom had a throat clearing tic, his teacher might say, have a drink, through the, but actually by doing that, you're reinforcing it. So the bottle's there, drink when you like, and we're going to ignore that tic, because as long as it's not causing any sort of safeguarding issues, and obviously if he's got a tic, he's going to throw something, that could be completely different. But it's about ignoring it. And the other piece of advice is to sort of distract the pupil from it, because sometimes tics are very environmental, they're very sensory based, so there will be something at that time in that room with that person. That could be the lighting, the acoustics, the feel of the table. There will be something that's happening at that time. So if we can distract them from that tic, and it might be leaving the room, not as a sanction, but just to sort of re-regulate ourselves, and whatever it is in that room has set off a tic for some reason. And that we can talk about triggers with children all the time. There will be certain triggers to certain tics, and it will be different for every child. So it's about school learning what their triggers are to their tics. Can we make those adjustments as we know we should? And can we make them as comfortable as possible to, avoid those triggers? And ultimately, we offer training to schools, free and paid in. So it depends what they're after. And peer training, don't we, to the class, if the child wants to, teach the class about it. And ultimately, that's the way to go, because spreading knowledge creates understanding. And what we want to do for these children is to just, exactly, that's our advocacy. We just want to normalise it. And that's, I don't know, Tracy's got glasses, Fred's got diabetes, and Tom's got Tourette's. That's just Tom. Don't worry about it. This is how we can help him and move on. It's about celebrating people's differences, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. So that's really, really helpful. So there are some myths. I don't know whether we want to jump into the myths and bust them all on purpose, because Tom alluded to earlier to the kind of the swearing one, which is a very small number of cases, right?
It's something like, isn't it like 1 in 10? Yeah, 1 in 10.
It's 1 in 100 have Tourette's, one in school children, and 1 in 10 of those will have what we call coprolalia, which is the swearing tic. It's very uncommon to come across it. Unfortunately, it's something I see quite a lot in my job, because of the very nature of the safeguarding issues surrounding it. It happens, and then they contact us because it's the most difficult to manage, because it's the most antisocial, and it is hard, when you're considering other children.
I mean, I don't know whether I want this to go out on a podcast, but I think, somebody swearing is fairly low down on the list compared to them potentially throwing something. There are other things that we could probably get over a few dirty words. And I imagine, I don't know, but I imagine if, because tics are transient, that, a student who experiences that doesn't necessarily experience that forever. That might just be a tic that is contextual to a particular learning environment or whatever.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think the reason why schools struggle with it so much is because so much attention is drawn to it. And you remember what I said, it's the suggestibility and the attention drawn to it. If we ignore that, it's not harming anyone. Obviously, it's difficult if you're 6 years old and that's happening. But if you're at school, it's happening. We know it's part of that child's tics. We move on. Science suggests it will lessen. That tic will lessen in that lesson. Funny enough, So it is about getting to know the child, isn't it? Like any SEN really, and know what makes them tick. There you go. There's another one.
Yeah,
there you go. Pun fully intended.
Yeah.
What other myths can we bust for our listeners then? We know that tics are completely involuntary. We know that most people who have Tourette's don't shout dirty words out. What else? What else do we need to know?
What are the myths? I mean, another good one is we never see Tourette's just on its own. Right. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. A lot of Tourette's always comes along with others. Most commonly, it comes with like ADHD, and actually, most commonly, it comes with like OCD. I have ADHD, ASC, OCD,
ABC 1 2 3.
ADHD.
All the letters.
All the letters in the alphabet. But
excellent.
It's very rare, isn't it, to come across a child with just pure Tourette's? And if it is, it's probably they're probably very early on in the diagnosis.
Well.
Sensory processing is a massive one as well. 80% of children with Tourette's will have sensory processing disorder. So it just depends what the primary. It's massive, isn't it? What the primary diagnosis is. I mean, Tom got your diagnosis of ADHD first when you were 6.
And I got tics not long after that, and ASD and
all the others followed, didn't it?
Anxiety and stuff like after, but they've all sort of culminated together to.
Actually, anxiety is a good one to talk about because anxiety fuels Tourette's. Actually, it fuels.
Right. Okay.
And it may not be that you've got a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, but most parents you'll talk to, and Tom's an actor. You wouldn't think he's an anxious person, but there is anxiety down, and it may just be the usual everyday anxieties that neurotypical children have every day, like what's for lunch in the canteen. A neurotypical child will just internalize that. But if Tom's worrying about it, with his autism, it can become a bit of an obsession, especially food. Would you like my food?
Okay.
And that can be quite anxiety fueled for him. What is going to be in the canteen? What if there's nothing I like? What's going to happen? And then he will tick. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. And again, what we say to teachers is you can't stop the tics. You really can't focus on them and stop them. But what we try and do is go back a step and look at the anxieties and the things and the triggers again that are fueling those urges, really.
So then to kind of extend that out for tutors then, I'm thinking about sensory processing disorders. I'm thinking about how that kind of anxiety is going to make those symptoms worse for that individual, that actually we want to be thinking about, what are the sensory needs of our young people, which is probably what we want to be thinking about anyway. But, more so when someone comes through the door who has Tourette's, because if we can help them stay calm and help them self-regulate during our sessions, they're maybe going to experience less of the kind of severe, extreme physical reactions that maybe are less comfortable, right? Because I'm imagining that there is a physical cost on your body for having, experiencing particularly the physical, the motor ones.
Well, tiredness is pretty damn real, isn't it, in the world of Tourette's?
Yeah.
Before Tom even gets to college now, he used to be school, college, he's done in at 9 o'clock because he's got lots of physical tics, lots of vocal tics. He might have the urge to throw his breakfast down his top. He's got to change his clothes. You know, you got the foot tick, haven't you? Where you're walking forward 4 steps and having to walk back once and touch his feet on things. You know, imagine getting to the train station like that, being on the train. You use your earphones, don't you? He's too old in his eyes to use his ear defenders now, but earphones and music work well, exactly. So, you know, I think they're very clever kids because they learn ways of adapting to the world. As
I mean, I wasn't going to say I was clever, but I'm glad you said it.
But yeah, I mean, sensory issues are massive. You know, they probably are. If you spoke to a child, they may not be aware themselves, but if you did something like a bit of a sensory walk around school, you know, I would be so bold as to say 90% of tics are triggered by environmental and sensory issues, you know, for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe then tutoring is particularly, we have a lot of tutors who work online. So actually, like, being able to be in a home environment is maybe helpful.
Yeah. Well, how have you found it when you worked with your tutors?
Working from home, both with tutors and working with someone has been very beneficial. And even I would say definitely I wouldn't have I don't think I would have passed maths if it wasn't for my at-home tutors. But if you mean like home learning, certainly for me, I found that quite difficult because I'm having people around you is a good, and having people around you doing the work that you should be doing is almost a good way of being like, oh, this is what I should be doing. But without that, you subconsciously find distractions like, oh, look over there, there's my gaming system that I might want to have a little break on. But
home learning was hard.
It was very hard.
Many people, you know, and for many SEN, home is home, school is school.
Right.
I'm a teacher, but I didn't want to be my son's teacher. You know.
Yeah, of course.
There's so many complexities, but home tutoring, you know, that extra support that we're talking about, you know, for Tom has been, you know,
absolutely,
it's been amazing, isn't it? Because you know, we teach the neurotypical, don't we? And all the neurodiverse, you know, if we taught the neurodiverse people, the neurotypicals would be fine. That's my theory, anyway.
You're preaching to the choir right there. Absolutely, yes.
Rewrite the curriculum together one time.
Excellent.
But you know, I think more and more teachers are becoming more neurodiverse aware, aren't they? It's getting but by having that one-to-one teaching with you know a company that actually knows about neurodiverse children and how they learn, you know, absolutely aware. But I think online was okay with that, wasn't it? Because it was comfortable and it was being at home.
Yeah, it was. In some ways, it was easy. In some ways, it was a lot more difficult. But and I think after a while, it just sort of balanced, and I managed to get it done eventually.
Going back to the tiredness thing, the trouble is after having all day at school and then coming home, it's a bit like the homework issue. Then to have a tutoring session at 6 o'clock. I mean, with executive functioning and all those things going on, Tom really zoned out a bit. So you did really well, though, didn't you, to try and engage in that again after school? But yeah, it's not easy.
What I'm also popped into my head while you're talking as well is that I've only been thinking about the Tourette's, right? But actually, that's not the main issue really when we're coming to access education, because actually the ADHD and the autism, all of those other things are going to have a much larger impact on how you know, sensory processing, how you perceive everything around you. So the Tourette's is maybe a bit of a red herring, you know, in the how we support students with Tourette's is actually, don't worry about the Tourette's. Worry about their other needs. Yeah.
I don't think the tics are really that bothersome to you, are they?
No, it's the co-occurring conditions that certainly impact my life more. But the Tourette's is still there, and it's still a part of my life, whether I like it or not.
But it's not defining
you. It's not defining you, yeah. Tourette's I always said that Tourette's will ruin your life. It will ruin your life, but only if you let it ruin your life. It will ruin it, but only if you let it.
I think if you get the right support, isn't it? If you get the right support,
exactly.
it doesn't need to. And that's part of my work, isn't it? Working with children to say, yes, you've got Tourette's, but, it's not going to stop you getting married, going to college, driving a car, all those things. That I think what children ask me, can I be a firefighter? The answer is absolutely yes, but you may need a little bit of support along the way, and we can provide that from very young age right into the world of work. And it comes back to educating people around us to know that this isn't what we think it is. Don't listen to the media because that's made wrongly. Listen to real people.
Just abroad, don't do that anyway. But yeah.
This might be really embarrassing for you, Tom, but I'm going to say it anyway. It is really, really lovely to meet a young person, and I'm sure this is, also to do with how your mum is with you, but who, feels confident and comfortable talking about their condition in a way that is kind of really usualized, and that is so good. That's so good.
Well, because we are normal, aren't we?
Yeah, we just
exactly.
Normal, and I can, if I can talk about it as a parent, we spend half our life trying to conform to the norm as kids do in school. Everyone's got to wear the same at school. Everyone's got to go to the same lessons, move at the same time. Actually, that's why you found college quite a struggle to begin with, I think.
Because obviously not saying that it's a good thing at all, but school is very structured, and this is what you're doing at this time, and this is what you're doing at this time. And obviously that it wasn't great it's not great for a Tourette's mindset. But I'd also almost gotten used to that and how that was the norm. And at college, it's completely different, as most 99% of your stuff is like, you do what you want. If you don't, it's fine.
Do it in your own time.
Do it in your own time. And that really shook me, because I was not used to that at all. And it really sort of shook me up. You spent
11 years of your life with the same people, same group of friends predominantly. Certainly the last 5 years are the same teachers at high school, doing the same subject. And like you say, all of a sudden that's a massive change and a massive transition, isn't it? But you struggle, but you cope really well, actually, eventually. But I think that, with parents, we struggle as well, because for 6 years before his diagnosis, we thought we knew we were a bit different, a bit quirky in this household. Weren't quite sure what it was. And you're judged by people all the time. When we went out for dinner, we'd have to take Tom's iPad. We were that family, that was very antisocial. But if we didn't, and he didn't focus on anyone, it would have been very hard for us and people around us. So sort of trying to conform all the time, put your children into this box. And actually, once you get, because diagnosis isn't for everyone, not everyone. People say to me a lot, I don't want a label. I mean, in my eyes, it's not a label. It's an explanation for how you are, and you don't need a diagnosis to access any support, certainly. But for us, because it's such an antisocial condition, we were judged by a lot of family and friends at the time. So you are expected as a parent to conform, aren't you? And it is difficult, because Tourette's is quite antisocial with the kids. And we were judged a lot with Tom growing up on our parenting skills. And for us, the diagnosis, we weren't keen on getting that label either, or a diagnosis for it. We thought we'd manage, but diagnosis did lead to support at school and more understanding, but also given us as parents that permission to go, do you know what? Actually, it wasn't our parenting skills. We were doing the right thing. It's just we didn't understand it, and we didn't know how to vocalize that to other people. And it's about having the confidence to go, this is our family, and this is how we do things, and it's okay to be different, because we're all different, and there isn't a norm out there. There is, people try and conform to the classic norm, but. And there's lots of that going on in schools, isn't there? Because it's very confirming place, really. Conforming, rather.
Yeah, and I think in school, again, as Tom said earlier, not to advocate for it, but to kind of understand it, there is a level of conformity required in a school setting so that people can be safe and, access as much learning as possible. And, the more we teach to neurodiversity, we're not going to exclude anybody by doing that, I don't think. Go on.
I was just going to say, Tom, when he got his EHCP in year 9, that was a bit of a game changer, because I'm an advocate really working with schools saying you don't need an EHCP to support a child to learn how to do it properly.
Yes.
However, I think their school did in some ways, and that's okay, because we're not, we shouldn't expect schools to be the experts. This is a very complex, challenging condition in schools, and we want schools to reach out and ask for support. And I think perhaps they didn't have children with Tourette's before. We know there's 100, but maybe to that extent, to that different, that complexity. So I think getting the HCP was important for Tom, because his diagnosis is complex. It's just not pure Tourette's, and there was a lot of learning support that you needed within that, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Having said that, Tom's really intelligent, aren't you? And he got better grades than most of his friends. And I do believe without the HCP at that time, it was just good timing for us that he wouldn't have had access to, if we want to talk about exam access arrangements in the case of children, that's quite nice with Tourette's children to understand what that means.
Yeah.
And we all know that in able to get those extra support for exam access arrangements, it has to be their norm, doesn't it? Their usual way of working. Yeah. So I do advocate for teachers to sort of find out what that is as soon as possible, so you can gain that evidence. But for Tom, it meant 25% extra time, because his executive function difficulties made him, organise things slightly different in his exam. You had a scribe, didn't you?
I did, yeah. That was cool.
Yeah, because they realised pretty early on in class he needed a scribe, because he could verbalise everything really well, but getting that on paper, I think with Tourette's and ADHD and OCD, actually, making mistakes and having to rewrite them, there's so much going on in that little brain, or big brain, sorry.
Well,
in that big
little brain, how dare you?
It's very busy. So in order to organise that, he needed that support. So a scribe, he's got hypermobility as well, so his handwriting's pretty illegible. Wow. Doctor level, isn't it? Doctor level.
Excellent.
So lots going on, and they gave. There was one example, you did a history assessment, didn't you? And didn't do very well. I think you got a 1 or 2, and then he had his EHCP and did his mock exam, and he came out with a 7. That's a huge. Because someone was able to scribe for him. He had a separate room, so he wasn't anxious about people around him. I don't know. I want to explain how that made you feel. What a difference.
It was certainly a game changer. It certainly warped what my idea of an exam was, because originally it was all in one room and all noise and everything. But as soon as I got into I had my own room and my own scribe and everything, it all just made sense, and everything, and I wasn't focused on anything outside of the exam. I was just focused on the exam itself.
And you can have rest breaks as well, so they stop the clock. You can move. Most of your exams are written with him walking up and down the room. That's how he works.
Yeah.
And the scribe was writing everything he said.
I tried not to do that, but I did find myself getting up and moving around.
Well, we need movement, don't we? That's
absolutely.
And that's why we ask teachers to consider that in lessons, rather than waiting them and setting them up to fail and knowing they're not going to be able to sit for an hour and a half in a double science. And acknowledging that, to be fair, after 10 minutes he's probably had enough of sitting still. And conforming, and build, and that's some advice for tutors, to build in those breaks, have those, we want to have high expectations on academic side, because they're very capable, these kids, but actually realistic expectations on how they're going to do that. Look very different.
That's the piece. The realistic expectations about how, not the what they're going to achieve, right? Because we've seen with you, Tom, that with the right supports in place, you've gone from being a 2, you're obviously not that. You managed to achieve a 7, and that's incredible. And that didn't, it was helpful that you had an EHCP, but if you had been working in that way, you'd have been able to access those exam arrangements without one. So that's really, really wonderful. Great. Fab. Okay, so we've spoken a lot about executive function, and I wonder whether the answer to this exists in the literature or not, but does Tourette syndrome impact executive function, or is it that executive function is a challenge in a lot of the comorbidities with Tourette syndrome? And so we don't know.
Many children suffer with executive functioning. Maybe that's observation on my part, most of EHCPs, if it's 50-50 whether a child has an EHCP with Tourette's, they don't, certainly not an entitlement, is it? And they may not need one, depending on how the tics affect them. But most of the provisions in EHCPs for children with Tourette's, I have noticed, are mainly around executive functioning. But we're not focusing on the tics as such. We can't enforce any therapy within school. That's done at home. And so it's mostly about how we can support their executive functioning. I'm not quite sure what comes first, really, and possibly because the statistic is so high of children with Tourette's and ADHD, and we know executive functioning is huge for ADHD children.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure why and the wherefores, really, but it's very common. It's very common, and the support that many of the strategies we ask teachers to support with the children with are around executive functioning. So, yeah.
And now, a brief word from last week's guest, Helen Dickman, whose episode you can catch after this.
So I really loved coming on the podcast and chatting all about tutoring. And it was so great to reflect on just how much my business has changed over the years. And honestly, I think that we really don't actually reflect on our achievements enough. We're always so focused on the future and what's going to happen that actually sometimes it's such a lovely opportunity just to go back through and have a chat about like all the different opportunities you've had and all the different experiences and kind of how it shaped your business to what it is today. So I'd always highly recommend Qualified Tutor to anyone in the tuition industry. I think they're an incredibly supportive group of educators, and honestly, I only wish they'd been around when I had first started.
So I'm going to do a little sum up of what I think I've learned and how I think I could support a student with Tourette's as a tutor. And then I'd like you to tell me if I've got it right or not. Okay, so no pressure for me, drum roll. So tics are completely involuntarily, and they will change over time. As a tutor, I should ignore them unless there's a safety risk. And that also might help the student experience fewer tics. Anxiety is a massive trigger for tics, and 80% of people with Tourette's have a sensory processing disorder as well. So actually supporting sensory needs of a student is a really helpful way to make them more comfortable in sessions. And then the final piece is that lots of people with Tourette struggle with executive function. So anything we can do that we would be probably doing anyway, hopefully, kind of crossing my fingers for anyone listening on the podcast, to support organising, decision-making, prioritisation of tasks and all that kind of stuff. If we can do that to support the student, then that's going to be helpful anyway, but it might be extra helpful for those people who have Tourette syndrome. How did I do?
What do you reckon, Tom?
Rubbish. No, I'm kidding. Very well, actually.
Yeah.
Pretty much all down to a T. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. You listened well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like me.
So I think maybe if both of you could answer this question separately, what is the most important thing that somebody should know? If they're only going to listen to, one snippet of you guys talking, what's the most important thing that people should know about Tourette syndrome?
You go first.
You sure?
Yeah.
I would say educate yourself, because we want to understand about this person. We want to find out as much as we can about it so that we can normalise it, support them, celebrate their differences within, it's important to be accepted in school, isn't it? Accepted by the community. Kids are in school a lot longer than they are at home. So it's really important we get that right to support their mental health, around that. So educate for me is the one thing. What do you think, Ken?
I think if you want to learn about Tourette's and become familiar with it, talk to someone with Tourette's, not necessarily about Tourette's, just talk to them in general, just engage with them and talk to them in general, because you will learn a lot more about Tourette's talking to them and witnessing them and their ticking than you will just looking on Wikipedia or something. You will learn a lot more by looking and talking to someone.
Student, yeah. Asking them, because you've got all the answers, obviously.
Most of them, yeah.
Most kids will be able to tell you. It's like at the SEN, isn't it? But kids are very astute and very aware of their needs. You know, negative behaviour, for example, is a child reaching out saying my needs are not being met, whether I need a wee or whether I'm not understanding the work. So it's all about talking to the child and not just conforming them to what we do with neurotypicals. You know, this is a different world and we learn very differently, don't we?
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. I have learned so much with you two, and I've honestly had so much fun. I could sit here for another few hours, but I'm not going to take that time away from you. So thank you so much. We'll post Tourette's Action's link in the podcast description so people can come and find you and read more about what Tourette's is and what it isn't. But yeah, thank you so much for your time this evening. It has honestly been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome. And if you've got any other questions or anything, we do have some really great training actually online. We have a free new e-learning module, which is quite nice.
Excellent. Well, if that's on your website, I'll find the link and stick it in the podcast description as well. That's amazing, because our tutors love a resource. So thank you so much, guys. And hopefully we'll maybe see you again at a future.
You know where we are if you need anything.
Thank you very much, guys. Have a lovely evening.
Back. All right.
Bye. Bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. Your next step is to check out the Love Tutoring Community, and in particular, Love Tutoring Community Connect, a new premium membership space which will serve all your subject-specific CPD needs alongside a friendly, professional community space that meets regularly. Visit qualifiedtutor.org/transformational-training to find out more about our CPD accredited Level 2 safeguarding and Ofqual recognised courses, the first of their kind in the tutoring industry. See you there.